Byron, you and I are being accused on Twitter of trying to erase Donald Trump from the Republican Party. I don't think so. I think we're looking forward. Both of us seem to have figured out that the way forward is a McConnell led way and a McCarthy led way. Is that a fair summary of your view of where the Republicans find themselves?
Well, you may have heard that Trump will no longer be president after noon tomorrow.
Correct.
I think that the news just turns, as it always does, to a new president. So, I mean, I was listening to your discussion with David about immigration, and of course it's going to turn to what the news is. I think this is kind of following the news as opposed to being obsessed with Trump.
That is exactly what I think. Now let's go to what President-elect Biden, soon to be President Biden, has proposed. You heard my conversation with David. Do you think the Biden proposal is an opening bid or a line in the sand?
It's an opening bid, but there's a good chance, I believe, of something passing, and maybe not all that different from what Biden is proposing. The reason I say that is that I covered the Gang of Eight negotiations really very closely back in 2013. And you may remember that the Gang of Eight Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill got 68 votes in the Senate. Unanimous Democrats and about 14 Republicans, about a third of the Republican conference in the Senate voted for it. The only reason it did not become law is because John Boehner, the House Speaker, stopped it in the House. A lot of conservatives like to dunk on John Boehner, but that would have become law if Boehner had given it a vote, essentially. So he's the one who really stopped the Gang of Eight bill. So I don't see why you couldn't have an equally large majority in this Senate. And the way they passed that bill in the Senate was there were a lot of Republicans who were on the fence, so to speak, about it. And they just threw billions and billions of dollars of what they called security into the bill. And, of course, Donald Trump's border wall is off the table, extremely unpopular among Democrats, obviously. They'll never, ever support a physical barrier, but they didn't back then either. What they did was they threw billions and billions at what's called virtual security, a virtual fence. You know, there'd be lots of surveillance and all sorts of high-tech stuff, but there would be no physical barrier to a person illegally crossing into the United States. They threw billions of dollars at that and got Republican votes at the very end.
Now, Byron, I also was deeply involved in that, covering it and talking with members who were trying to persuade me to support it, because I'm an immigration wet, as I suppose this audience knows, the old Tory wet dry, meaning I'd let everyone stay who isn't a security threat or violent in the United States. That's not a problem. We had full employment. By the way, does that argument persuade you? We had full employment in January of last year. There are clearly not too many people taking jobs away from Americans in America right now by virtue of their non-permitted status.
Well, we had full employment, and we also had, during Donald Trump's term, rising wages for middle and lower end of the scale workers for the first time in many, many, many years. And a lot of people, they talk to old liberals, former liberals perhaps, like Mickey Kaus. It's because of the tightness of the labor market. So I think there's an argument to be made about that.
But we now look at Washington, D.C. We look at Washington, D.C. as it is right now, and we see fencing and walls everywhere because they are security. And I think the Republican Party may have gone left on regularization of the people who are there and right on border security infrastructure, meaning that those 452 miles of tall wall have made an impact on the party, and that if they will not complete the wall, we're not going to have a deal. And if they do,
tell you,
what's that?
I have to tell you, I'm not as I don't have as much faith in those Republicans as perhaps you do. I think there could be, especially someone like Lindsey Graham, just kind of a snap back to the status quo ante. You know, before Trump, Lindsey Graham, was a member of the Gang of Eight. He was very big on this stuff. He agreed with all the virtual fence stuff. And I cannot see Republicans prevailing on insisting that there be more construction of a physical barrier on the border.
Let me argue that with you, Byron. One of the Gang of Eight is Marco Rubio, who is
Yep.
who regretted his support of that bill. It undercut him in the primaries.
He regretted after he ran for president. Yeah.
Right. And he wants to run for president again, and he is probably going to face a primary challenge from Matt Gaetz in this cycle. Have you heard that?
I've heard it, but I have no idea if it's going to happen.
Yeah, so I've heard that's the buzz around too, is that Matt Gaetz is going to try and take out Rubio, which will be funny since Rubio took out the establishment candidate. So Florida keeps going redder. And so I think you lose him from the Gang of Eight. John McCain, of course, has passed on. So Senator Graham is there. Who else is a wet on immigration besides me? And I don't have a vote in the Senate.
I don't know. We'll have to we'll have to see. But remember, 68 votes. You don't get 68 votes without a lot of Republicans.
Yeah, well, there were a lot of Republicans. I just think that John McCain and Marco Rubio gave a lot of cover to Republicans, and they're both not going to be on the front line here. McConnell and Thune, and I think especially Senator Cotton, who was in the paper yesterday denouncing it as amnesty, right? He represents the hard-nosed approach. And in the House, if they force a vote on immigration reform, new districts will come along. And if it's immigration reform without security, don't those congressmen become vulnerable in new districts?
It's entirely possible. By the way, the Gang of Eight the bill was just filled with fine print. I mean, there were sections of it establishing the wages for fruit pickers and sorters in certain areas, and all sorts of wages by industry, all sorts of stuff.
It was nuts. Remember the Z visa? The Z visa that John Kyle later admitted was a disastrous idea. John Kyle was part of the Gang of Eight. That was also cover for Republicans.
And also, in terms of background checks and crime, I believe it disqualified convicted felons. As far as misdemeanors were concerned, an illegal immigrant had to have 3 misdemeanor convictions, but they all had to be on separate days. So
and Byron, can I point out as well, the 2022 cycle has 4 border state races. It's got a California race, a Nevada race, an Arizona race, and I believe, is Feinstein up this time, a second California race?
Yep.
So it's got 4 border state races on it. Now, the Democrats in California might believe themselves to be safe on immigration, but Nevada and Arizona, it's a different issue there than everywhere else. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, and remember, Donald Trump has done better in both of his races, has done better with Hispanic voters than certainly than Romney did, and better than McCain did, I believe. You'd have to go back to George W. Bush to do better with Hispanic voters than Donald Trump has. And what Donald Trump discovered was the significant number of Hispanic voters who are in favor of legal immigration and opposed to illegal immigration.
Yeah,
so
yes.
That's what he discovered.
The strategic choice for the Republicans is to embrace regularization and security. That's their strategic choice. And I think, there's going to be some deep polling on this, but intuitively, that's where I think the party's going to end up. Do you think they'll end up left of that and accept virtual security? Because we saw that under Napolitano and it didn't work.
Exactly. It's been tried a lot. But the thing to look for when you talk about accepting regularization in exchange for security or regularization with security, the thing to look for is BS security. That's the question. What is the security like? And it was of the BS variety in the Gang of Eight. And remember that Congress was it 2006 passed the Secure Fence Act, and all the big Democrats voted for it to build an actual fence.
700 miles of it.
700 miles of the border, and Nobody says you need it on 2,000 miles. You need it about 700 or 800 miles.
And we've got 452 miles done.
And Congress the next year went back on it and decided that they did not have to build
This is the issue of 2021 right in front of us.